He doesn't need two grandmothers. My daughter-in-law Ashley said those words right to my face with a cruel smile at my grandson Noah's first birthday party. My own son, Kevin, just stood there, looking at his feet. A dozen people, friends and family, watched the whole thing. The air just went cold like someone had opened a freezer door. I felt my cheeks burn red, not from anger yet, but from shame. Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches. Thank you. In that moment, surrounded by balloons and laughter, I felt like the loneliest woman on earth. My heart ached, a deep, raw pain. All I wanted was to give Noah a hug. My own son's wife, Ashley, had just cut me out of his life. She made it clear that her mother, Brenda, was the only grandmother allowed. The little hand-knitted sweater I had made for Noah, tucked in my bag, felt like a heavy stone. They thought they had gotten rid of me. But they had no idea what kind of fire they had just lit inside this old woman's heart. Before that day, my life was simple, filled with hope. I had spent months dreaming of being a grandmother. I'd imagined cuddles on the couch, reading storybooks with Noah, teaching him to bake cookies just like my grandma taught me. I pictured spoiling him with silly toys and endless love. I had even knitted a soft blue sweater for his first birthday, thinking of how warm and safe he'd look in it. I truly believed I was going to be a big part of his life, just like I was for my own son Kevin. But when I arrived at Kevin and Ashley's house for Noah's party, it was clear that someone else was already filling that spot. Ashley's mother, Brenda, was everywhere. Brenda held Noah for all the pictures. Brenda was front and centre when Noah smashed his cake. She was introduced to every guest, loudly as Grandma. I, Eleanor, was just in the background. I poured drinks. I cleared plates. I smiled politely at strangers. I tried not to let the sting get to me. I kept telling myself, it's just a party. My turn will come. I had no idea that my turn was never, ever meant to come at all. I waited, patient as a spider in its web. I saw my chance when Noah was put down on the grass chasing a balloon. My heart swelled with so much love I thought it would burst. I walked over, my arms open wide, a happy smile on my face. "Can Grandma get a birthday hug?" I said, my voice soft. I saw Noah's little eyes light up, and he started to toddle towards me. But then, Ashley, my daughter-in-law, moved like a flash. She stepped right in front of Noah, blocking my path. Her face was hard, not a hint of warmth. She didn't shout. She just looked at me, her eyes colder than ice, and said, "He doesn't need two grandmothers, Eleanor." Right there, in front of everyone. Brenda, her mother, stood right next to her, a smug look on her face. My arms, still open for a hug, felt suddenly empty, heavy, like stone. It wasn't just a rude comment. It was a declaration. They wanted me out. And my own son, Kevin, just looked down at his shoes. What kind of mother-in-law was I to be so easily replaced? The rest of the party was a blur. I remember smiling at people, but I don't think my eyes were smiling. I felt like a ghost, floating through a party that I was no longer a part of. My son, Kevin, spent the whole time at the grill, flipping burgers and avoiding me. Not once did he come over. Not once did he say, "Mum, I'm sorry." The car ride home with him was the worst part. The silence was so loud it hurt my ears. He just drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his jaw tight. He wouldn't look at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask him, how could you let her do that to me? How could you let her erase me? But I didn't. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and stared out the window at the passing houses. The silence wasn't just an absence of words. It was an answer. He was telling me, without saying a thing, that he had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. When he dropped me off at my quiet, empty house, I knew that the battle for my grandson had just begun, and I was completely on my own. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughter-in-law Ashley's cold, hard face. I heard her words over and over again. He doesn't need two grandmothers. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy weight on my chest. I couldn't just lie there and let it crush me. I got up, put on my robe, and went into my late husband's study. It was my quiet place, the one room in the house that still felt like it was full of strength. I walked over to the old steel safe hidden behind a painting and spun the dial. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. It was something else. A fire. An anger I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out a thick leather folder. On the front, in gold letters, it said, "The Noah James Trust." I had set it up the day my grandson was born to secure his future. As I ran my fingers over his name, the hurt in my heart began to harden into something else. It was the beginning of a plan. They thought I was just a sad old woman. They had no idea what I was truly capable of. I sat at my husband's big oak desk and opened the folder. The trust was for Noah's college, his first house, everything he would ever need. But my husband was a clever man. He knew our son Kevin could be weak-willed. So, we had put in a special section, a little surprise. It was called the Family Heritage Clause. The clause stated that to get the full amount of the money, Noah had to have a real, documented relationship with important members of both his father's family and his mother's family. And the best part? The person who decided if the relationship was real, the person who held all the power until Noah turned 25, was me. I was the sole trustee. Ashley hadn't just been mean. She had made a terrible $1 million mistake. She thought she was kicking an old woman out of her grandson's life. She had no idea that she had just kicked a hornet's nest, and in doing so, she had put her own son's entire future at risk. With the knowledge of my husband's cleverness safely locked away, I knew my next move couldn't be loud or angry. It had to be quiet. It had to be smart. The next morning, I made a simple phone call to my bank. For the last year, I had been sending my son, Kevin, and his wife, Ashley, a generous check every month to help with their mortgage. It was my gift to them, a way to make their life easier. With a few calm words to the bank teller, I cancelled all future payments. Then, I picked up my cell phone and sent a text to my son. I wrote, "Hi, honey, hope you're having a good week. I'd love to see a new picture of Noah when you have a moment." It was a test. A few hours later, a reply came back. It just said, "Sorry, we're really busy." I knew Ashley had written it. They were shutting me out just as I expected. But it didn't matter. I had cut one of the secret strings that I used to hold up their perfect life. And now, I would just wait for them to feel the weight of it. I didn't have to wait long. It was the 5th of the month, the day the payment was usually sent when my phone rang. It was Ashley. She didn't bother with a hello. Her voice was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Eleanor, did you forget to send the mortgage payment this month?" she asked. The way she said forget was a little dig, a hint that my mind was failing. I took a slow, calm breath. "No, Ashley, I didn't forget," I said, my voice as smooth as polished stone. "I've decided to stop the payments." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, her voice came back, laced with disbelief and fury. "What do you mean you're stopping them? We count on that money, Eleanor. How could you be so selfish?" "I'm just re-evaluating my finances, dear," I replied sweetly. She sputtered for a moment, a stream of angry noises. Then the line went dead. She had hung up on me. It was clear this was never about my love for Noah. It was about my money. But I had to wonder, why did they need it so desperately right now? The answer to my question came a week later, in the most ordinary of places. The cereal aisle at the grocery store. I was reaching for a box of oatmeal when I heard their voices from the next aisle over. It was my daughter-in-law, Ashley, and her mother, Brenda. They were talking in excited, hushed tones, and they had no idea I was there. "The location is perfect," Ashley was saying. "Once we get the startup capital, we can sign the lease for the boutique." Her mother, Brenda, laughed. "Don't you worry, honey," she said, her voice full of confidence. "Your mother-in-law will come around. She'll be begging to give us the money once she realizes it's the only way she'll ever get to see Noah." My hands gripped the handle of my shopping cart so tightly my knuckles were white. It was a plan. The cruelty, the rejection. It was all a sick game to try and corner me, to make me so desperate I would write them a check. They didn't just want me out of the way, they wanted to rob me on my way out. The cold, hard truth of their plan settled in my bones. But an overheard conversation wasn't enough. I needed proof. It came a few days later when I ran into an old friend, Carol, at the pharmacy. Her husband is a manager at the main bank downtown. After we chatted for a bit, she got a funny look on her face. "Eleanor," she said, leaning closer. "This is a bit awkward, but I saw your daughter-in-law, Ashley, at the bank last week. She was applying for a big business loan for some children's boutique." I held my breath. "Oh, really?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Carol nodded. "Yes, they had to turn her down. But here's the strangest part. She didn't even seem upset. She just laughed and told my husband, 'Oh, it's fine. My rich mother-in-law will give us the money anyway. She'll do anything to see her grandson.' So that's what I was to them. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just a bank, a problem to be solved with money. Well, I decided then and there that this bank was officially closed for business. I went home that day with a fire in my heart and ice in my veins. They wanted to play a game of power and money? Fine. I would show them what real power looked like. I didn't scream or cry or call them. I went into my study, sat at my husband's old desk, and turned on the computer. I created a very official-looking letterhead that said, "From the office of the Noah James Trust." Then I typed a short, formal letter. It said that, per the Trust's bylaws, a mandatory meeting was required to review the long-term planning and stipulations of the fund. It stated that the presence of both legal guardians, Kevin and Ashley, was required. I printed it on heavy cream-coloured paper, the kind that feels important in your hands. I sealed the envelope and dropped it in the mailbox at the end of my driveway. The little red flag stood up like a soldier going to attention. It was done. The bait was in the water. Now, all I had to do was wait for the sharks to start circling. It didn't even take a full day. The next afternoon, my phone rang, and the caller ID showed it was my son, Kevin. His voice was higher than usual, tight with anxiety. "Mum, we got a letter. A really formal one about Noah's Trust. What's going on? Is there a problem?" In the background, I could hear Ashley's sharp, frantic whisper, "Ask her what it means. Ask her about the stipulations." I let a moment of silence hang in the air before I answered, my voice calm and collected. "There's no problem, Kevin. As the letter states, it's just a routine review, but it is mandatory and both you and Ashley must be there." "A review of what?" he stammered. My voice was cool and even. "Of the rules," I said simply. "All the rules." I gave them the time and address for my financial advisor's office for the following week. "Don't be late," was all I said before hanging up. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. It was working. They were terrified, and they still had no idea what was about to hit them. In the days leading up to the meeting, a strange sort of sadness washed over me. To remind myself what I was fighting for, I went up to the attic to look through old photo albums. Tucked in a dusty box, I found a stack of letters my son, Kevin, had written to me when he was in college. I sat on the floor and read them, the smell of old paper filling the air. Most were about his classes and friends, but then one letter made my blood run cold. He was writing about his new girlfriend, Ashley. "She's really great, Mum," the letter said in his familiar looping handwriting. "But sometimes all she and her mother talk about is money. It's like they're always sizing people up, figuring out what they're worth." He went on to say that her mother, Brenda, had made a joke about him coming from good money. The faded blue ink on the page told a story I had never wanted to read. My son hadn't been fooled or tricked by Ashley. He had been a volunteer. He knew exactly who she was, and he chose her anyway. And that, somehow, hurt more than anything else. I walked into my financial advisor's office with a spine made of steel. My son Kevin and his wife Ashley were already there, sitting in big leather chairs and looking small and nervous. They tried to give me weak smiles, but I just gave them a polite nod and sat down across the big mahogany table from them. My advisor, Mr. Davison, got straight to business. He explained the size of the trust and how it was invested. Then, he cleared his throat and got to the important part. "Now," he said, "I need to draw your attention to Section 3, the Family Heritage Clause." He explained that for my grandson Noah to get his inheritance, he had to prove he had a real, loving relationship with his family. Both sides. "And the trustee," Mr. Davison said, looking over his glasses at them, "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, is the sole judge of what qualifies as a real and loving relationship." Ashley's face went completely pale. Kevin looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Mr. Davison closed the folder with a quiet snap. The sound echoed in the silent room. She finally understood. I didn't need to buy my way into my grandson's life. She was going to have to beg. The phone call came the very next morning. It was my daughter-in-law, Ashley, and her voice was so sweet it could give you a toothache. "Eleanor," she gushed, "I'm just so terribly sorry. After our meeting yesterday, I did a lot of thinking. I've been so stressed lately, and I have been a complete monster to you. It's not who I am." She laid it on so thick, blaming everything but herself. Then came the real reason for her call. "Please," she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity, "can you let us make it up to you? Come for dinner this Friday. We can start fresh. We need to, for Noah's sake." Her words, "for Noah's sake," were the little hook she was using, trying to reel me in with my love for my grandson. I knew it was all a performance, a complete lie, but I also knew I had to see it for myself. "That sounds lovely, Ashley," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. "I'll be there." I hung up the phone. The game had changed, and now I was going to play along. When I walked into their house that Friday, the air was thick with fake kindness. My daughter-in-law, Ashley, rushed to take my coat, her smile so wide it looked painful. Her mother, Brenda, was there too, patting my arm and telling me how lovely I looked. It was a show, and I was the star audience member. They sat me in the most comfortable chair and immediately placed my grandson, Noah, in my lap. "Get a picture, Kevin," Ashley chirped at my son. "Look how much Noah loves his grandma Eleanor." Flash. Flash. The camera went off again and again. They needed evidence, you see. They needed photos to prove to the trust that they were a happy, loving family. I smiled for the camera and hugged my grandson, but my heart felt like a block of ice. Every compliment they gave me felt like a lie. Every laugh felt rehearsed. I drove home that night with the flash of the camera still in my eyes. They had their pictures, but I had a sickening feeling that this was only the first act of their desperate, greedy play. A few days later, I got a phone call that turned the ice in my heart to stone. It was from Mr. Gable, my family's accountant for over 30 years. He was a kind, quiet man, and he sounded deeply uncomfortable. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "I'm calling about a rather unusual inquiry I received yesterday. It was from your son, Kevin." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "He was asking some very specific legal questions," Mr. Gable continued. "He wanted to know what the process was for establishing a durable power of attorney over a parent's assets." There was a pause, and then he asked what would happen if that parent was deemed medically unfit to manage their own affairs. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. They weren't just trying to trick me into a relationship with my grandson anymore. They were looking for a way to have me declared crazy so they could take everything. My son wasn't just trying to get into my good graces. He was looking for a way to get into my head. The fear that washed over me was cold and deep, but it only lasted for a moment. Then it turned into pure, cold anger. I immediately called Mr. Gable back. "I need your help," I said, my voice no longer trembling. I told him everything. The two grandmothers comment, the trust fund with its special clause, the desperate need for money for Ashley's boutique, all of it. He listened in complete silence. When I was finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. "They're trying to build a case to have you declared incompetent, Eleanor," he said, his voice grim, "so they can become your legal guardians and control the trust." "I know," I said, "and we are going to stop them. I need you to find out who they've been talking to. Lawyers, doctors, anyone. I need to know what their plan is." "I'll make some quiet calls," he promised. The days that followed crawled by. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for a storm to break. I knew they were planning something dark and terrible. I just didn't know how close they were to succeeding. While I waited for my accountant, Mr. Gable, to call me back, my daughter-in-law, Ashley, made her next move. It happened on social media, where all the world could see. She posted a beautiful, professional-looking photo of herself, her mother Brenda, and my grandson, Noah. They were all laughing. The perfect happy family. I wasn't in the picture, of course. I was the ghost they were trying to pretend never existed. But it was the caption she wrote underneath that was the real dagger. "So, bless my son has one true devoted grandma to look up to," she wrote, adding a little heart emoji at the end. She tagged all of our family members and mutual friends. It was a public announcement, meant to humiliate me and write me out of our family's story for good. My finger trembled slightly as I pressed the buttons to take a screenshot. It was cruel. It was public. And it was the most perfect piece of evidence they could have ever given me. She thought she was winning the argument. She had no idea she had just handed me the sword. The phone rang 2 days later. The caller ID said it was Mr. Gable, my accountant. I answered on the first ring. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was flat, with none of its usual warmth. "I've made those calls. I have the information you wanted." He paused, and in that short silence, a knot of dread formed in my stomach. "I don't want to discuss this over the phone," he continued. "You need to come to my office. Today, if you can. It's important." Hearing him say that, a man I'd known for 30 years, made my blood run cold. Whatever he had found was worse than just a few ugly questions. This was serious. This was real. But my voice was steady when I replied. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. I hung up the phone and grabbed my car keys from the little bowl by the door. I didn't know what he was going to tell me, but I knew one thing for sure. After this meeting, nothing would ever be the same again. I sat across from Mr. Gable in his quiet, sunlit office, but I felt a deep chill. He didn't waste any time. "Eleanor," he said, looking at me with sad, tired eyes. "It's worse than we thought. They're not just asking questions anymore." He slid a piece of paper across his polished desk. It was a memo from a lawyer he knew. "Your son, Kevin, and his wife had a formal meeting with an elder law attorney last Tuesday," he said softly. "They have already begun the process of filing a petition with the court." I stared at him, my mind refusing to understand. "A petition for what?" I whispered. Mr. Gable took a deep breath. "They are petitioning the court to be named your legal guardians. They are arguing that you have diminished mental capacity, and they're using your decision to stop paying their mortgage as proof of your erratic behaviour." I sat there, the sound of the clock on the wall ticking loudly in the silent room. My son. My own flesh and blood was trying to have me declared insane to steal my money. The grief was so immense I thought it would swallow me whole, but then a cold, hard thought pushed through the pain. They had started a war. Now it was my turn to finish it. I went home from the accountant's office and made a phone call. My hands were steady, my voice was clear. I called my son, Kevin. "Hello, Kevin," I said, my tone as calm and pleasant as if I were asking about the weather. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we all last spoke. I've made my final decision about Noah's trust." I let that sink in for a moment. "I would like the whole family to come to my house this Sunday afternoon. I'll explain the final terms then. Please make sure Ashley and her mother are both there. It's important that everyone hears this at the same time." He agreed immediately, a little too quickly. I could almost hear the greed in his voice, the relief that his schemes were working. He probably thought I was finally breaking, that I was ready to give them whatever they wanted to be back in their lives. He promised they would all be there. I hung up the phone and looked out at my quiet, peaceful garden. They thought they were coming to my house for a surrender. They had no idea they were walking into a final judgment. On Sunday, the doorbell rang at precisely 2:00. I opened it to find the three of them standing there: my son Kevin, his wife Ashley, and her mother Brenda. They were all smiles, looking at me with fake pity, like they were visiting a sick relative. I led them into the living room where I had a tray of iced tea waiting, just like a good hostess would. They sat down on my sofa, looking confident and smug. I let them get comfortable before I made my first move. I reached for a piece of paper that was sitting on the coffee table and slid it towards them. It was the screenshot of Ashley's social media post. "Before we discuss the trust," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I was hoping you could explain this to me, Ashley. I'm a little confused about who Noah's one true devoted grandma is." The smiles vanished from their faces. Ashley looked at the paper, her cheeks turning a blotchy red. She stammered something about it being just a silly post, but the damage was done. The trial had begun. I didn't even look at Ashley as she fumbled for an excuse. My eyes were locked on my son. "Actually, Kevin," I said, turning to him, "maybe you can help me understand." I reached down beside my chair and picked up a small stack of faded blue letters tied together with a ribbon. His old letters from college. I was feeling sentimental the other day, and I reread these. I picked one from the top. "I found this one particularly interesting," I said. I began to read his own words back to him, my voice clear and strong. "She's great, Mum, but sometimes all she and her mother talk about is money. It's like they're always sizing people up." I put the letter down and looked him right in the eye. "You wrote that to me when you were 19 years old, Kevin. You knew who they were from the very beginning." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no words coming out. The devoted son, the loving husband, it all fell away. All that was left was a weak, cowardly man, caught in a lie he had been telling for 20 years. I let my son, Kevin, squirm in his silence for a moment before I delivered the final blow. I looked him right in the eye. "It's amazing you were so willing to hurt me, Kevin, especially when you were also so busy making plans for my future." I turned my gaze to my daughter-in-law, Ashley. "Both of you." I leaned forward and spoke slowly, making sure they heard every single word. "My accountant, Mr. Gable, is a very thorough man. He told me all about your meeting with the elder law attorney. He told me about the petition you started to file with the courts." I saw the colour drain from Kevin's face. Ashley's mouth fell open in a silent gasp. "You weren't just insulting me," I said, my voice like gravel. "You were actively trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. You were trying to steal my home, my money, and my mind." The room was completely silent. The truth was finally out, uglier and more terrible than they could have ever imagined. There was nothing left to hide behind, or so I thought, until the quietest person in the room finally exploded. It was Brenda, Ashley's mother, who broke the silence. She shot up from the couch, her face a twisted mask of pure rage. But she wasn't looking at me. She was screaming at her own daughter. "I told you she was smarter than she looked. I told you this was a stupid plan." All the years of quiet resentment came pouring out of her. "I had to watch her for 30 years in this town, with her perfect, successful husband and her perfect, beautiful house, while I was left with nothing. You were supposed to be better than them, Ashley. You were supposed to win." We all just stared at her. Ashley looked at her mother, her eyes wide with shock. All the cruelty, all the lies, the two grandmothers comment. It had all started as a tiny seed of jealousy in this woman's heart, a seed she had planted in her own daughter and watered with poison for years. Ashley was a cruel woman, yes, but her mother had been the one to teach her how. In that awful moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. I waited for Brenda's screaming to die down into ugly, heaving sobs. I stood up, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a year. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You've made my decision much simpler." I looked at the three of them, a team of broken, greedy people. "The trust will remain in place for Noah," I announced. "However, my lawyers are already drawing up a new amendment." I let them hang on my words. "I, Eleanor Vance, will remain the sole trustee for my entire lifetime. All decisions about Noah's future will be made at my discretion, based on my personal relationship with him, free from the influence of his parents." I looked right at Ashley. "You are no longer a factor." Then I stood up, my back straight and my head held high. "This meeting is over. I would like all of you to leave my house now." They just sat there, broken and defeated. They had come to my home to take everything. Now they were leaving with absolutely nothing. They left without another word. I watched from my window as my son, Kevin, and his wife, Ashley, and her mother, Brenda, got into their car. 3 bitter, defeated people, bound together by their own greed. I closed the curtains and the house was suddenly, completely silent. There was no joy in my victory, only a deep, hollow sadness for the son I had lost. I knew I couldn't have him in my life anymore, not while his heart was so full of poison. That evening, I made arrangements through my lawyer for all future communication about my grandson Noah to go through him. The door to my heart and my home was closed to my son and his wife, perhaps forever, but the door for Noah would always, always be open. I looked at the picture of my sweet grandson on the mantel. The war with his parents was over, but the fight to give him a life with at least one honest, loving grandparent had just begun, and it was a fight I intended to win. A week later, I went to the bank. I sat down with a manager and signed the final papers for the new amendment to Noah's trust, securing his future and my role as its protector. But then I did something else, something just for me. "I'd like to open a new account," I told the woman. "Let's call it the Eleanor Vance Adventure Fund." For the first time in my life, I was putting my own name on a dream. That afternoon, with a cup of tea in my hand, I wasn't thinking about my son or his cruel wife. I was sitting at my computer looking at pictures of the sunshine on the ancient stones of Rome and the blue waters of the Amalfi Coast. I started a list of all the things I wanted to see, all the foods I wanted to taste. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just surviving the drama someone else had created for me. I was finally planning to live. My accountant, Mr. Gable, called the next day to confirm that all the legal paperwork was filed. "You handled this with such grace and power, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You truly did." He paused for a moment and then said, "You know, it's funny. It reminds me of another client of mine, a gentleman whose children are trying to sell his family business right out from under him. He feels so trapped and alone." I listened, a small smile playing on my lips. "I was wondering, Eleanor," Mr. Gable continued, "if you might be willing to talk to him someday. Maybe just share a little bit of your story?" I didn't answer him right away. I just looked out the window at the beautiful, clear blue sky. My terrible story was over, but I had a feeling that my work, my real work, was just getting started.